And on the 21st day of the conflict in Mali, let's go by way of the General Staff of the Malian Armed Forces to kickstart the day. Ladies and gentlemen, join me as I take you away.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces informs national opinion that, as part of their ongoing offensive reconnaissance missions throughout the national territory, the air vectors of the FAMA have successfully carried out this Friday, May 15, 2026, several targeted strikes against armed terrorist groups in different localities of the territory. In the Dandugu sector, west of the city of Mopti, surveillance and reconnaissance operations have made it possible to identify black tents carefully hidden under a vegetation cover. The cross-checked and confirmed intelligence indicated that this armed terrorist group was planning to carry out hostile actions against civilian populations. Following the precise identification of the targets, 3 strikes were made in the targeted area. The impacts accurately reached the designated points, resulting in the complete destruction of the terrorist armed group. In addition, another strike was carried out to the northeast of the village of Tintamarine. Similarly, an air operation was successfully conducted on one of the trucks carrying enemy logistics in Ubde, northeast of BER. The targeted truck was completely destroyed. As a result of the impact, several motorcyclists dispersed in different directions. Reconnaissance and strike operations continue in the sectors concerned in order to confirm and supplement the information collected on the results of the interventions. The Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces congratulates the FAMA for their professionalism, efficiency, and unfailing commitment to the service of national defense. Armed terrorist groups will be hunted down to their last entrenchments throughout the national territory.
The Malian Armed Forces continues the seek and destroy mission of those different groups that are trying to operate in Mali. And another operation happened in the Kumbakala region in Mali, where the Malian reconnaissance operation ensured that a JNIM terrorist camp was spotted and movement of enemy personnel were actually spotted, and the Malian Armed Forces carefully launched a precision targeted strike at this location. And after this operation, the battle assessment shows that 100% of the enemy personnel in that location were de-radicalized. So ladies and gentlemen, there was another action that happened in the Nara region after the operation of the Kumbakala. The convoy of the Russian African Corps and the Malian Armed Forces were on a routine patrol where they spotted a group that was an outset of the JNIM called the Katiba Masina, very popularly known for their green turban. Ladies and gentlemen, immediately they spotted the Malian Armed Forces in collaboration with the Russian African Corps. They followed the first instinct, which was to fly, and by the time they fly, the only direction they could fly through was the direction of the civilian community. Now, when they got to the civilian community, what they thought was that the Malians would not be able to engage. According to the information we got, there were area vectors on Overwatch as this mission continued. But against the thought of the jihadists, the Malian Armed Forces opened fire right on them. The terrorists returned fire, but one of the most surprising thing here is how the civilians were able to hold their nerve while this close combat operation ensued. At the end of this operation, the battle assessment showed that the Malian Armed Forces were able to neutralize 90% of these enemies, while some fled with various degrees of injuries. And you can see in the videos right there, the enemies have been de-radicalized. Now, the ones that fled with the injuries of various grades were followed up by the helicopters and they were leveled out. 100% de-radicalization in that operation. According to the information we are receiving from Kidal, the Malian Armed Forces has just carried out multiple strikes in the Kidal region again. So it's now becoming a 24 hours event. So 24 hours after 24 hours, we're getting multiple strikes. But we still don't see those Western armaments that were sent to these groups they were glorified. Maybe it was a propaganda at the end of the day, but we will see. The Malian armed forces are dealing with them based on the capacity that has been projected from the Western mainstream media. But what we are not seeing is a response from the terrorists, is a counter-offensive from the terrorists in the magnitude of the Western media propaganda. Because, I mean, when you see this level of airstrikes, the Stingers and the Mistrals, those man-parts should be working, but we don't have none of it going on right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, according to the situational report, the Malian armed forces were able to destroy 6 enemy APCs. Ammunition and fuel depot was completely obliterated. FLA defensive positions were crashed and 6 command posts were neutralized. According to reports, several enemies personnel were de-radicalized in the process. You already know what de-radicalized mean in this situation. So, ladies and gentlemen, now this is the military report from day 21. Let's go to the diplomatic front, where President Emmanuel Macron is having a lot in his hand to handle right now. Ladies and gentlemen, join me as I take you away.
This diplomatic and political topic in this news program, facing the senior reporter Georges Malbruno, President Emmanuel Macron let his anger erupt after revelations about France's actions in the Sahel. The journalist claims that Paris is now operating covertly with armed groups, notably in Mali, in collaboration with Ukrainian secret services. These methodical accusations made on RTL's airwaves call into question the French strategy in the region, a media appearance that further undermines already tense diplomatic relations between France and its former partners. We take a closer look at this with Karim Bichenga.
What you have done here, given the sensitivity of the subject, given what you know about this country's history, is irresponsible.
The French president's outburst. Facing journalist Georges Malbruno, Emmanuel Macron lets his anger show. What you have done is very serious. President Macron tells this journalist, 56 years old, a senior reporter at Le Figaro and a specialist in conflict zones. But what could this journalist have done to make the French president so furious? Remember, it was this
France, in fact, Thomas, has no soldiers in Mali, where for the past 2 weeks, an alliance between jihadists and Tuareg rebels has captured several cities and is seeking to overthrow a pro-Russian junta, the intelligence services in the Sahel.
These remarks confirm what many observers had suspected. France has left without really leaving. Worse still, it is now working with those it once fought in the name of counter-terrorism. And this revelation, especially coming from a French journalist, a former hostage, and an expert on these conflicts, does not go over well at the Élysée. When the French president runs into him in Beirut, Lebanon, he flies into a rage.
What you did there, given the sensitivity of the subject, given what you know about this country's history, is irresponsible. Irresponsible for France, irresponsible for those involved here, and serious from an ethical standpoint. You've heard me defend journalists, I always do, but I'm speaking to you frankly. What you did is serious, unprofessional, and petty.
All this, however, does not call into question the truthfulness of the journalist's statements. Georges Malbruno, a seasoned senior reporter accustomed to war zones and challenging environments, is no novice. His questions, sometimes unsettling, reflect an essential mission: to inform. Yet, faced with him, the president let his anger erupt, a reaction that speaks volumes about his view of dissent.
I was really uncomfortable seeing a president of the republic be so vehement because the words were much harsher than what you heard. They lasted several minutes, 7 or 8 minutes.
The French president's reaction has shocked the press world, but it serves as a harsh reminder. The freedom of the press, taught and praised by France, fades away when faced with the interests of the French state.
It's serious ethically.
First of all, I want you to watch this again.
Also, this question of fighting against insecurity. That is exactly what you were counting on in order to convince the entire population, was it not? But tell me, isn't there still a significant element of failure within that plan?
No, there isn't any failure. You know, Mali is facing the terrorist hydra, and terrorism is known all over the world. It struck Paris, it struck Madrid, it struck all the major Western capitals. We are victims of these terrorist organizations, whether it's Al-Qaeda or Daesh. But I still want to point out that today we have an army that has modernized, an army that is very well equipped, very well trained, and an army that operates across its entire national territory.
Assimi Goïta, transitional president, who since the beginning of the month has also been Minister of Defense. Is he still the right man for the job, or should other possibilities be explored?
You know, today, since the events of the 25th, I think you have all noticed the great mobilization of the Malian people from north to south, and even beyond the borders. Malians have shown their love for their country, their love for their army, and above all, their commitment and determination to fight against the terrorist hydra, whether it is President Assimi Goïta, members of the government, members of the CNT, or the entire population. Today, Malians are more united than ever to face this threat, and they reject terrorism in all its forms and with the utmost firmness.
Yes, but still, there was an attack that happened very close to Bamako. In Kati, there is also Kidal. There is still that aspect. We shouldn't ignore the fact that there is a failure from that point of view as well.
No, there is no failure. You know, before the arrival, before Assimi Goïta came to power, everyone knew about the security situation in our country. There was even a large part of the territory that was beyond the control of the Malian state. Today, the Malian army has the capacity to operate across the entire national territory. Now, as I told you, international terrorism unfortunately strikes all states. And today, as I said, Malians and the Malian army are determined to confront this. And we are currently striking back at these terrorist groups twice as hard. I would still like to point out that the spectacular attack they carried out in Kati, which led to the assassination of our Minister of Defense, is the same kind of attack they carried out against Mohamed Bouzaf in Algiers. They did the same thing against President Sadat in Egypt. So terrorism, unfortunately, is carried out by people who use a very cowardly modus operandi, which consists of striking by surprise. And unfortunately, no power, even the greatest in the world, is immune to these kinds of attacks. And I think that you, being in Paris and in France, have seen this with the Bataclan.
Yes. Musa Agasalatuman, you who know the Azawad Liberation Front well, what is your perspective on this alliance between the FLN, the FLA, and the jihadists?
Some of our brothers who have made this dangerous choice are playing with fire because, unfortunately, they have not drawn all the necessary lessons from what happened in 2012. In 2012, they made some of us, not to say the majority at the time, made that choice. But a few months later, we saw what happened. It was the terrorist organizations Al-Qaeda and Daesh that ended up overpowering everyone and driving everyone out. I think it's something quite thoughtless, and it's something that will unfortunately lead to what they already know. Their future is not with Al-Qaeda, it's not with Daesh. The future of every Malian lies within their own country, and I think they should think twice before continuing down this dead-end path.
So in recent days, the army has struck Kidal. What is the objective? Is it to retake the city as quickly as possible?
Today, the Malian army is conducting operations across the entire national territory. It has struck Kidal, and it has also struck beyond Kidal. It has carried out strikes in the tri-border area near Menaka. It is conducting strikes in central Mali, and it is conducting strikes in southern Mali. The Malian army is determined not to leave a single centimeter of its territory to any terrorist organization.
And how reliable is Africa Corp, which was originally your partner in the Malian army? And then we know there was this agreement reached with the FLA, with the withdrawal from Kidal. What exactly is the reliability in the end of this partnership?
I can't speak about things I don't know. All I am sure of is that our Russian partners are alongside the Malian army, and you are even showing images that illustrate this, whether in the south, the north, or the center. These are partners who are with the Malian army, and the Malian army continues.
And in another report, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, called the Russians the colonizers of the 21st century.
In East Africa, we have to be clear, some young people who are influenced by certain activists who are sometimes given a lot of attention. And when we also repeat the narratives put forward by other powers, who are the real colonizers of the 21st century, namely the Russians and others?
But what happened after he made the statement? The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has responded based on what Emmanuel Macron claimed. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's listen to what the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had to say about this.
Hello, Sergei Viktorovich. Igor Kurachenko, Arte in French. Emmanuel Macron recently stated that Russia was a true colonizer in Africa. How would you comment on these remarks made by the French leaders?
Who knows better than the French what a true colonizer is? You know, about 5 years ago, when changes were taking place in the Sahel countries, especially in Mali, I participated in the UN General Assembly. On the sidelines of the session, as always, many bilateral meetings took place. There, I met with Josep Borrell, whose position is now held by Kaja Kallas, and the French Minister of Foreign Affairs who accompanied him at that meeting, Le Drian. I believe that's his name. At that time, Mali was a hot topic on the international agenda. They started reproaching us for having supported the change of government. Among other arguments, I said that the new government had asked us to help them with reforming and strengthening their security structures, and that we had simply responded to their requests. This was later mentioned, by the way, in speeches delivered during the plenary session of the General Assembly. My counterparts, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Spaniard, Josep Borrell, responded to me. But you know very well that the Sahel and Africa in general are our zone, that of the European Union. I replied, I don't know. I know there were colonial possessions there and that political independence was later proclaimed, that colonization was brought to an end. There are concrete United Nations resolutions. I have not read anywhere that the former colonies were granted to you in perpetuity, as if they were countries where others no longer have the right to set foot. But that's it. That was their philosophy, and, apparently, it's already inscribed in the genes of our French colleagues, who judge everyone according to their own criteria. Ours is completely different.
Ladies and gentlemen, you think that is enough? No. Just at a time when I thought that was enough, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to see another report that is even pathetic. Ladies and gentlemen, join me.
There is a buzz surrounding these discoveries.
I found about 10 passports along with about 10 identity cards.
Egypt, Tunisia, and even Canada. These passports, valuable sources of information, prove that the international jihadist movement was establishing a heavily armed rear base here. All these documents, and especially the GPS devices that were found, made it possible to trace a jihadist highway for foreign fighters.
In a public interview, the French journalist, a former editor-in-chief of a French public channel, reveals all the intrigues of the French authorities from the beginning of the Malian crisis in 2012 up to the present day. France is just pulling the strings. Let's take a look at the analysis of this interview with Sidiki Damili.
Time is the best judge. That's obvious. Yes, with time, the masks come off and people are starting to speak out in the French press about the security situation and all the media campaigns against Mali. From Operation Serval to Takuba, including Barkhane, it was all a sham. A real state lie, according to Norbert Navarro, journalist and former editor-in-chief at RFI.
From the start, a state lie. It's January 2013 and the president at the time, François Hollande,
who had just been elected a year earlier,
launches Operation Serval, which would later become Operation Barkhane. And he tells the French that the jihadists were about to seize Bamako. In my opinion, that's a lie, and a state lie at that. The jihadists had no interest in taking a capital city that was hostile to them.
Hard to hold.
Yes, impossible to hold in the long term. And secondly, because the jihadists had a different war objective when they went on the offensive and were stopped by the French paratroopers, it was the runway at Sévaré airfield. So yes, that they wanted it, and their ambition was probably to split Mali in two and create a state in northern Mali with de facto allies.
France was driven out by the three AIS countries, but it didn't go far. It continues to pull the strings. A bombshell revelation from the French journalist: France, through French-speaking Ukrainians, is indeed behind the terrorist attacks that targeted several Malian cities on April 25th.
We learned that the coordinated operation carried out by the jihadists against Mali, which to me reminded me of another operation in 2002, that of the rebels who attacked Côte d'Ivoire with several hotspots at the same time. Well, this operation was coordinated by French-speaking Ukrainian auxiliaries who helped those people with the approval, says Malbruno, and I think he's a reliable source of the French secret services. In other words, an operation that benefited the jihadists was supported.
The more time passes, the more France reveals itself. Its objective is clear: to regain control at all costs over the three AIS countries that have cut ties with it, and to maintain its grip on the CFA franc.
The aim was to try to regain control of the three countries that have broken away from us.
That got away.
Exactly. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. France would not be what it is without the Franc zone, which covers a large part of Africa, since there are no fewer than 14 countries in Africa that are part of this area. It is the legacy of General de Gaulle that still endures today. France is doing everything it can to try to promote a false front for the CFA franc in the region.
It's a complete washout. Far from the political rhetoric of the Élysée, the reality is quite different. In Bamako, Niamey, and Ouaga, the truth about the media campaign against Mali is coming to light, and the very same troubadours who were squawking on their propaganda channels yesterday are now giving themselves away. Our cause is noble. The AS is moving forward.
When you see this Tozi status quo ante under the debacle of Misgiven and Comey, I can tell you something. This is a clear sign that the enemy camp is not united. Even if they are united on what? I mean, we've been saying on this platform that Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, they were the ventricles and they were the atriums of this so-called superpower nation. There was a time the Russian President Vladimir Putin said, if some nations get decolonized, we might see a situation where the former colonizer might end up becoming a third world country. Ladies and gentlemen, when you look at the assessment on the ground from the military and the diplomatic front, the Western mainstream media gave a report. They said Mali will fall. But this is the 21st day. Mali have refused to fall, but it looks more like some people are falling. That person falling, be the guest in the comments. It's your boy 7200 signing out enough said, but before I go, you can do what to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. This is how you show the appreciation for the work we do every day. Because if you don't, Andre will cry. Thank you, and God bless you.
Who now see their grains stolen and sent by the truckload to Russia. They are then shipped to countries that are friends to Moscow, such as Syria and Burkina Faso.